Tonight, I want to prepare you for Purim in a way that perhaps is less than traditional. For those of you who studied Torah with me before, not everything you're going to hear tonight is a chidush. Not everything is new. But you don't only go for the sparkly things in the story. No, sometimes you just have to review the things you need at home and you buy them every week, and that's also important for life. It's very important for me as a disclaimer, and those of you who've been studying Torah with me regularly, you know how much we avoid getting involved in practical politics in any which way possible. Whatever I wish to share, even if it touches somehow on some political conversations, I don't come from that place at all, and I'm asking that if you don't agree, that's the beautiful part of the Bet Midrash. You don't have to agree with anything I say. We just learn Torah together. And if you do agree, then kol hakavod. But the point tonight is not to make you agree or to disagree. The point tonight is to share a perspective that I'm not sure everyone always has when it comes to Purim. Last night, I was in Washington, D.C., officially North Bethesda. And I was introducing one of my colleagues who was being installed as the rabbi of the community there. Now, I had never been installed as a rabbi in my community. I've never been to an installation of another rabbi in his community. The installation doesn't come with like IKEA instructions. How do you install this device? It's kind of like you do whatever you do. And they were asking what's the traditional way to install a rabbi. And the truth is I have no clue. But Divrei Torah is how you install a rabbi. And I was lucky to share their Divrei Torah. After I spoke, there was a congressman who spoke all about how you should vote for him in the coming elections because he wants to be a senator. And he was very pro-Israel and supports Israel for the most part. And everyone was very grateful to him for that. That keep happening. So it's like the plot against my video. So I have a video that's going to show me who put it right there. Just for. And after he spoke, a minister from the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. spoke. Beautiful man. He was involved in the Abraham Accords before he came here to Washington, D.C. And he spoke about how the story of Purim is a story of Jewish separation, of Haman telling Mordechai, telling Achashverosh that Yeshno Am Echad, there's one nation. Mefuzar umforad ben ha'amim, who are scattered, dispersed among your nation, of all the nations. V'datehem shonot mikol am, v'datei hamelech en amosim. Their religion, their way of life is so foreign to what we know, and they don't even listen to the rules of the king. I got stuck here on the way from Borough Park. I could tell you that last part of the pasuk is for sure true. Double parking, triple parking, quadruple parking. Only in New York you can get away with that kind of stuff. That part, maybe Haman is right. Haman was right about the whole sentence. Yeshno Am Echad, there's one nation. The whole world knows that we are one nation. Mefuzar u'forad, but we ourselves are scattered and dispersed internally, geographically, emotionally, religiously, in every which way. We've managed to make more denominations than maybe any other. Okay, the Christians are pushing like 14,000. I'm not going to get it, but 35,000 even. Okay, so Rabbi Yosef is being melamed zechut on the Jewish people. We're not so bad, okay? But I'm sure if you start doing the numbers of how many Christians there are in the world versus how many Jews there are, and then split us all up into categories, my dear brother Ronen, who is not involved in any synagogue politics anywhere in the world, managed to get himself on every board of every Beit Knesset that he ever went to. And not because he looks to sit on the board. Once upon a time, there was a merger between communities. And what broke the merger, correct me if I'm wrong, which direction the parochet is going to go? Are we opening to the right? Or are we opening to the left? How do you move the curtain on the Torah? There are major issues that the Jewish people are facing, and that's one of them. Now you know. You came tonight to learn something new. Haman is not wrong. There's a Jewish nation that's divided. And he said, therefore, this minister last night, he said that, what was the solution to the division? Lech kenoset kol haYehudim. Go gather all the Jews. V'tzumu alai, and they should fast for me. Al tochlu v'al tishtu sheloshet yamim laila v'yom. Don't eat, don't drink for 3 days. And then maybe I can go to Achashverosh, and the rest is literally history. And I told him last night that I just want to correct him after he stepped down. I said, that's part of the story of Purim. But that's the Orthodox Jewish version of the story of Purim. It's not actually what happened in the story of Purim. And it's very important that we don't continue to perpetuate this mistake because it has long-lasting ramifications and consequences for the Jewish people when we teach the Torah in a way that is incorrect or incompatible with what is actually written inside of it. And that's tonight's shiur. I managed to tell him that in 30 seconds last night. Tonight, we're going to elaborate a little more on this point. I want to introduce you to a Chacham. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Toledano. He's a very, very interesting character. That's pretty much all I'm going to say about his personality, because once you start jumping down the rabbit hole of who was Rabbi Toledano, you're going to agree with me that he was a very, very interesting character. He was the chief rabbi of a number of different places, Tveria. He then left Tveria to go be the rabbi in Pekin. I don't know if you know where Pekin is, but he decided to go lead the Jewish settlement there. He was in Tangier, in Kahir, Tel Aviv. He also became a minister of religion in one of the Israeli governments. He was all over the place. He was also very famous for reprinting many old works of Chachamim which have been lost. And one of his most famous enemies, I can't tell you his name because that would be Lashon Hara, he claims that almost all the writings of Rabbi Toledano that he republished are forgeries. None of them are real. He was a man who was, he called them some pretty, in the DSM-5, you know, there's some words that he used about Rabbi Toledano to say about him that he was a serial plagiarist, and that was, he had a psychopathic drive to plagiarize things. I'm not talking about anything that Rabbi Toledano plagiarized or didn't. I'm not saying I agree with that conclusion. Just that if you ever think you have enemies, trust me, some people have worse enemies than you have. Just wanted to print some books of the Rambam, and he got the book thrown at him. This particular book that we're going to study together, if you go to shiviti.org/New York, forgive me that the page is not as pretty as it should be. I tried doing it right here in the first few seconds. Thank you for the hotspot. Comes from a book called Yam HaGadol. Rabbi Toledano was born in 1880 and died in 1960. The last name Toledano tells you that his family was? From Morocco. Very good. That's okay, good, also from Spain, for sure. But Morocco, famous Toledano rabbinic dynasty, all over Morocco. One of the Chachamim that I got to study from, Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Toledano, in his home, already in his grandfather's home in Morocco, the only language they spoke was Hebrew. So some people spoke Arabic in the street, but in his family they spoke Hebrew. I'm talking to you about many, many, many years before there was a state of Israel. Before anyone had a chance to reinvent or revive the Hebrew language, there were still people who spoke the Hebrew language. I know it might sound crazy, but that's the truth. And here's the question he was asked. It's mamash one of the last questions, if not the last question in his book. And the fact that such a question needs to be asked tells you already everything you need to know about the state of affairs of the Jewish people. You see that page, shiviti.org/New York? There should be a PDF on the top that says the Jewish Castle Doctrine. Someone familiar with what the Castle Doctrine is? Chacham Martin Cohen. Where? He's right here. He stepped out? No. What's a Castle Doctrine?
I don't hear so good. It's a Castle Doctrine.
The Castle Doctrine. And more, what is the Castle Doctrine?
Castle?
It's okay. Yosef knows.
Stand your ground.
King of the castle.
He's the man. Isn't it about standing your ground and protecting
Domain.
yourself?
Yeah.
Eminent domain.
Eminent domain. Very good. What are we talking about? Someone breaks into your home. Chaz v'shalom, should never happen to you. They threaten your life. In some states in this country, before you can protect your life from the person who's attacking you, you have to try as much as possible to get out of the situation in the first place. And meaning, even though this is your castle, you have to retreat from your castle. If you could have run to the backyard, but you chose to shoot the guy who was trying to kill your wife, then you're actually the one who's guilty and not the other way around. And those of you who want to get upset about the world, you should just study law. It's a very upsetting topic. You know law. Of course, I should have asked you. My first class I ever did in New York on my own. You were there in the lower east. Where was that? Upper East Side? That was by Rabbi and Rabbanit. Oh, well, look at that. Oh, Hashem. Who was from Dubai, and now he's in Florida. Yeah. So, in certain states, and I don't know what the law is in New York, but even in California, you have the right to protect your castle. The cost for defending yourself in a self-defense case in California is upward of $400,000. So let's say someone comes in and tries to kill you. They try to kill you, but you manage to kill them first. Doesn't matter gun, doesn't matter knife, doesn't matter baseball bat. What happens when the police show up to your house? They arrest you. Why? They can't arrest a dead guy. They see a dead person on the floor. They say you holding a weapon. I mean, the only thing the police officer can see is there's a murderer and there's someone who was murdered. Now, you tell them, listen, self-defense, doesn't matter. Just keep it for the judge. There's nothing to tell the police officer. It's not his job or her job. The job is just to take you to somebody who can decide. They do that, and here begins a very long process. First a criminal process, later a civil process, depending on who you killed. That criminal process, it's true that you have the right to self-defense. You have to prove it. The only way you can claim self-defense is if you first... You have to know some laws here. I'm sure you're in New York of 2024. People trying to kill you all the time.
Yeah.
You have to? Okay, in New York? Okay, let's say you're in a place where there's Castle Doctrine. You don't have to retreat. When you go to court, you're presumed to be innocent. Innocent until proven guilty, for the most part. That's supposed to be the rule, yes? Now you come to court. In order to plead self-defense, what do you first have to do?
Oh, plead guilty.
You have to first plead guilty. Because you can't claim self-defense if you didn't kill the person. You can only claim self-defense or an insanity plea or whatever other plea you might do if you first plead guilty. Which means if you admit guilt, the first thing that's going to happen to you is going to stick on you that you killed somebody. Now you want to claim self-defense, that you have to prove. How do you prove it? Cameras, testimony, witnesses, expert lawyer, witnesses, all kinds of people that you bring in for this thing. In the state of California, that costs on average about $400,000 to protect yourself. If you can't afford it, the law is what you can afford, Chevra. That's how it works. The law is what you can afford. This is a legal system, not necessarily a justice system. And because of that, if you can't afford it, then you have some experience with the law too. I remember that.
In fact, 10 years in jail.
Yeah. No. You had a very... Exactly. This is something you must know. So all of these, it doesn't have to be a gun owner. I'm telling you, even if you were to punch someone in the face and you kill them because you're trying to save your family, that would also be the same story. Same story. And then guess what happens afterwards? So you win the criminal case. But the guy that you killed had an ex-wife who gets alimony payments. And now she doesn't get alimony payments anymore. And now her son is supposed to get child support payments till he's 18. But he's only 8 years old. So now she comes after you in a civil trial. Doesn't matter that you were self-defense. In a civil trial, to get back, she needs the next 10 years of support, and you're the one who has to pay for it. Most of the time, if you have a good insurance company, if you are a firearm owner, they might try to settle this out of court and say, listen, lady, we'll pay you $3 million up front, and the rest, that happens more often than you'd like to think. Welcome to the wonderful world of law. So the fact that there is a Castle Doctrine, that you get to stand your ground, and you get to, doesn't mean that right afterwards you just sail off into the sunset like a good Hollywood movie. It means that's where all the trouble in the world begins. And that's what we came to talk about tonight. In which context? In the context of halakha. Look with me on page 1 here. Siman Tzadi Zayin, section 97. Nishalti mechad mididai. I was asked by one of my friends, Im levaer im bichlal mitzvat yeshuv Eretz Yisrael b'zman hazeh chayavim kol Yisrael להשתדל בכיבוש הארץ בכל מיני האמצעים אפשריים. Is there even a mitzvah nowadays to live in the land of Israel? And those who live in the land of Israel or can live in the land of Israel, are they obligated to try to conquer the land of Israel, meaning reclaim the land of Israel for the Jewish people in any way possible? V'chen, also I was asked by the same friend, so the first question is there a mitzvah for Jews to live in the land of Israel? Now this might sound like a funny question to you, because what kind of question is that? Why would there not be a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel? Famously, who doesn't count this as one of the mitzvot? The Rambam. Why does the Rambam not count this as one of the mitzvot?
It's kind of implicit.
How are you supposed to fulfill half of those mitzvot if you're not in the land of Israel? Just like the Shulchan Aruch doesn't tell you have to believe in God, because why are you studying Shulchan Aruch if you don't believe in God? You don't have to, somebody doesn't have to spell out everything. You have to take tirumot from your field land of Israel, masrot from your field land of Israel, and you have to do this and that in the land of Israel. All of that implies that you're living in the land of Israel. It's a given that that's the case. But other people understand from the Rambam. No, if the Rambam didn't mention it, must mean he didn't think it was a mitzvah to live in the land of Israel. Yes?
Mitzvah that apply to Kohen. So just because a Kohen mitzvah doesn't apply to me doesn't mean that I don't have to keep the rest of the Torah. So wouldn't there be certain situations that you would say that if, to whatever extent you're obligated to those mitzvot, then you follow the ones that you're obligated. Why not just say that when you're in Eretz Yisrael, it's that you're ones in Eretz Yisrael, the ones when you're not there?
When? Because when you're not doing those mitzvot, you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. You're not maybe doing an avera, but you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. You're being mevatel the ability to fulfill a mitzvah. Aside from one chacham, the Megillat Esther is his name. I think everybody else understands the Rambam the same way. I'm not telling you you're wrong. This is the way. On the flip side, there's a famous Tosafot. You familiar with Tosafot? Tosafot who says about whether you should live in Israel or not. There was a very famous rabbi lived here in New York. I'm not going to mention his name. I don't want to offend anybody. He was famously quoting the Tosafot who say that nowadays there's no mitzvah to live in Israel. I mean, even if you go to Israel and live there, you don't get a mitzvah of living there. You heard about that one?
No, that's news to me.
What did Tosafot say? Tosafot writes, I want to listen carefully because I'm going to say something wrong, and those of you who speak Hebrew are going to correct me. Tosafot says, Eino mitzvah ladur or lashuv be'eretz Yisrael. Okay, to live, it's not a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. That's what he said, right? Oh, okay, so what is Tosafot talking about? Tosafot says it's very dangerous. To get to Israel is very hard. The ways are dangerous. There are all kinds of armies trying to kill you. People die of illnesses along the... So therefore, there's not a mitzvah. So why bother, said this rabbi in New York. What's the point? Fine, we're talking about... El Al is also pretty complicated. You know, you go there, they check your bags. It's complicated.
It's not the crusade.
It's not...
It's worse.
So this argument is to say that you're putter because you're putting your wife in your hands, similar to like calling off the Mishnah of rabbis went off for saying Shema, that he got off his donkey in order to say Shema at night. They said you put your wife in your hands in order in a dangerous situation.
I mean, you don't have to risk your life to go live in Israel. But he says, ain't no mitzvah. I'm reading this wrong. So was the rabbi in New York. One of you knows Hebrew. If I want to say it's not a mitzvah, mitzvah is a word, right? Mitzvah is a masculine word or feminine word. Plural of mitzvah? Mitzvot. Anyone says mitzvim?
No.
Right. So the word eino. Eino is masculine or feminine? Masculine. Don't doubt yourself. You're right. Masculine. And therefore the word eino cannot possibly be referring to the mitzvah. Rather, what's it referring to? The person. And so that next word is not mitzvah. What is the next word? Ah, very good. Mitzuveh. Listen now. Because it's dangerous, eino mitzuveh. You don't have an obligation to go risk your life to make it to Eretz Yisrael. But if you did, of course it's a mitzvah to live in Israel. Meaning, don't blame Tosafot because you didn't go to school and learn how to read Hebrew. This is a simple grammatical error that caused a whole philosophy to be developed that the Jews who are living in Israel don't even get mitzvot. And so here you have Rabbi Toledano is being asked, is it even a mitzvah to live in Israel? Because we're hearing that it's not. And then the next question is even better. V'chen im en isur, is there any prohibition ללמד לבני ישראל קשת, תכסיסי גבורה וסדרי הגנה? Is there any prohibition against teaching the Jewish people how to fight, how to engage in warfare, how to use weapons to defend themselves, or להילחם ולעמוד על נפשם, or to wage war and save their lives נגד צורכיהם ומבקשי רעתם, against those people who are trying to kill them? Let הצורך, obviously when it's needed. So question number one, is there even a mitzvah to live in Israel? Question number two, are Jews allowed to involve themselves in such a terrible thing like learning how to go to war?
Somebody better tell David.
You were here in my last class. Someone better tell Abraham, someone better tell Yitzchak, someone better tell Yaakov, or David HaMelech, Shlomo. Are you going to pick a name? Pick a name. Yes.
I'm just looking at the Shiloh. It says, Chayavim, Kol Yisrael, Yishtadel,
Yeah, kibush.
Doesn't that mean to actually travel and conquer?
Yeah. So there's three questions, really. Question number one, is there a mitzvah to live in Israel? Question two is...
Here is, but is there an aspect to forcefully want to stay?
No. Yeah, okay, that's question number two. But question number three is if you're even allowed to... Are Jews allowed to engage in warfare in the first place? Now, I told you I just came back from Israel. And in the 36 hours that I was there, Israel's a ghost town. The tourist industry is not what it was. The store owners are hurting a lot. I know you hear about the apples and the oranges rotting in the field. It's also a problem. But there are people who are paying mortgages and rents and they can't cover that. The airport is running, it's not at half-mast. It's like an eighth of what it should be running because everybody is drafted. The people who are not drafted it's the complicated situation. I found myself in certain communities in Israel where, oh, it's good to know there's a war happening now. We had no idea. We're busy making coffee in yeshiva. And this question is very relevant. And so here's what Rabbi Toledano is going to teach us. Tshuva. I'm obviously not going to read to you all 8 pages, okay? We're going to select passages from here. לא רציתי לנגוע בפרט כזה מכמה טעמים. I didn't really want to touch this topic for a number of reasons. You can imagine why a rabbi might be afraid to answer this question? Why? Politics. People are going to say the rabbi is a fanatic terrorist. The warmonger, very good. The religious people who don't want to go to the military might take issue with the rabbi who's saying that he's going to get attacked from everywhere. So I didn't want to touch this question. But, because the questioner forced me, and because I saw one more problem, because I saw that many of the great rabbis in the previous generations, and especially in this generation, are mistaken, and continue to mislead. They continue to mislead the Jewish masses. That I have to speak. How are they misleading the Jewish masses? Here's what they say. I was going to bring to you a whole bunch of quotes tonight, but I don't need to tell you quotes. If you don't believe me, I'll send you the quotes. What does he say? The Jewish people have developed a mentality. Shekol zeman she'anu begalut hachel hazeh. That so long as we are in this bitter exile, asur lanu leharim rosh. It is forbidden for us to raise our heads. Ki mitzvah anenu. It's a mitzvah for us. Lachfof et atzmenu lechol aritz u'moshel. That we should bow our heads down to every tyrant, to every brute. To give ourselves lemakim u'lemortim. That's from Yeshayahu. To allow people to beat us and destroy us and hurt us. Really, mortim is to rip out the hair. Ki'ilu hutar dam Israel, as if Jewish blood is free. V'ke'ilu kach nigzar milfanav yitbarach, that this seems to be some divine decree. Latet l'mshisa Yaakov v'Yisrael abozazim, that God has decreed that Jewish blood should be spilled in the streets, and that's part of God's divine plan. And so we just have to learn that in this exile, we must accept that. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. And there's a day on the calendar called Yom HaShoah, Israeli Holocaust Memorial Day. Now that day usually falls out in the month of Nisan, so right between Pesach and the new month of Iyar. Now there are 3 Israeli days that come out in this time period. Day 1, Yom HaShoah. The 5th of Iyar, Yom HaTzmaut. Okay, Yom HaZikaron is always the day before, so Israeli Memorial Day for our soldiers. Unfortunately, this year, there's going to be a whole new world of soldiers that are, and their families. It's something that I don't think anyone has even began processing yet. I know someone who's part of the widows of the Yom Kippurim War. The last few years, when the widows get together, they stop taking them on hikes, and then because they're already getting older, it's complicated. But this time around, there's a whole bunch of new widows that are able to do hikes. They could even bring their kids along. Right after Yom Ha'atzmaut, 5th of Iyar, we have the 28th day of Iyar, Yom Yerushalayim. Now, when I was in yeshiva, there was religious opposition to celebrating or commemorating any of those days. Any one of them. Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, those are easy. Why don't we commemorate those days? We're Zionists. Yeah, we're not Zionists. That's how it works. Yom HaZikaron, we didn't ask them to die for us. Yom HaShoah, listen, it's a Holocaust. Come on, are you going to politicize the Holocaust? Why not commemorate the Holocaust? Here's the answer. Because in the month of Nisan, it's forbidden to mourn. You can't mourn in the month of Nisan. So how do you have his Holocaust Memorial Day in the month that you're supposed to be happy? Says who? The same people who are mourning during Sifirat HaOmer. Is that not the same time period? No shaving, no getting haircuts, no music, no weddings, no happiness, no whatever else. By the way, Sifirat HaOmer, happy day or sad day? Ramban writes in his commentary on the Torah that this is like a long Chol HaMoed. Pesach is day one of the holiday. Shavuot is the last days of the holiday. And there are 49 days of celebration in between. The farmers finally get to bring their grains to Yerushalayim and celebrate. And then we appropriated that holiday and turned it into a holiday of mourning. It's like to add insult to injury. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, in his book, Mekor Chaim, on Yom HaAtzmaut, he writes, I feel that God is reclaiming his calendar. The Jews took away 49 days of happiness, and he's taking them back one day at a time. The 5th of Iyar, the 28th of Iyar. The same people who tell me you're not allowed to mourn in Nisan, mourn in Nisan. So what's the real reason? The real reason is that you probably didn't go to school with my wife. I know some of you might have gone to school similar to my wife.
The day that they picked is the day of Warsaw.
The day of Yom HaShoah commemorates the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And as you know, those Jews who fought against the Nazis are horrible people. Because they went against God's will. Because God's will was that we're supposed to die. And how dare we interfere in the Nazis' plans for us to die? And if you think that what I'm saying sounds ludicrous to you, this is textbook teaching in many religious schools. If you want to know more about it, Ruth Lichtenstein has a book called Witness to History, page 189. Thank you, Rabbanit. I told my wife next time I want her to give a class, so you're going to have to push her on this one. Yeah. You do not want to take responsibility for the things I'm going to say, but it's... Is that why? That's why you're in Galut over there, I see. Accepting the judgment on yourself. This is standard textbook information. In the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, there were rabbis who were for and rabbis against. You can't fight now. Listen, we're going to die. We have to accept God's plan that we're going to die. Jews don't bear arms. Jews don't go to war. That's why I gave you my class last time. My whole class last time was to show you Jews are warriors. But some Jews, they forgot about that. And instead they developed these people. By the way, everyone in Sfirat HaOmer is mourning. The students of Rabbi Akiva, who supported the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans. Likely, if you want to know why 24,000 of his students died, it was because they were fighting the Romans. Don't tell anybody I told you that. Because why else would the Jewish people mourn people who all they are known for is they weren't nice to each other? Why would we mourn bad people? Rather, we are faced with a dilemma. How could such good people who fought for the Jewish people all die? So we had to find something they did wrong and blame it on them. Always blame the victims. And that's part of a tradition that we have. But the story? Rabbi Akiva's students are following in his footsteps. He was an active opponent of the Roman occupation of the land of Israel. And he was very vocal about it. So vocal that it cost him his life. And his students, like most students, followed in their footsteps. And so it's very interesting to me, by the way, that the story happens the way it does. But here's what Rabbi Yaakov Toledano has a problem with. There seems to have developed in the Jewish people, it's a theology even. The Jewish people in exile are supposed to die. Lower your heads, take the blows. We're supposed to be hurt. We're supposed to be mocked. We're supposed to be destroyed. We're supposed to be humiliated and downtrodden. That's galut, chevra. Get used to it. That's how Jews are supposed to live. Until when? Until Mashiach comes. When is that? Nobody knows. How's it going to happen? Nobody knows. What if it already started happening? We don't care. And this philosophy says Rabbi Toledano is a problem. And listen what he says. שבמחילת כבודם גרמו בזה לאיבוד כמה נפשות וכמה קהילות בישראל. These rabbis are directly responsible for numerous Jewish lives and the lives of communities to have been destroyed. Because throughout history, היו לפעמים רבות יכולים להציל את עצמם מהריגה ואבדון. There were times that Jewish people could have saved their lives and waged war and saved their families and their children. But instead, they chose to go as martyrs. Those of you familiar with the writings of Chacham Faur, there's a whole chapter on the invention of Jewish martyrdom. I'm sure some of you go to synagogues where they praise the martyrs every week. ואומר כי דורש דמים אותם זכר לא שכח צעקת הנביא. What is that whole prayer? We start praying for all the communities that were massacred. Even better, Sephardim have one up on Ashkenazim. Watch. Sephardim copied a Catholic prayer. It goes like this. I just said it at the beginning of the class. Ha-merachem al-kol briotav. May the compassionate one, Christians just say Jesus. Nefesh, ruach, neshama. It's literally word for word out of the Catholic prayer book. It's called the Hashkava. Later it turns into a Yiskor or El Maleh Rachamim. Jews start praying for martyrs when the Catholics do it. The Catholics start praying for martyrs when? During the Crusades. I'm sending people for 25 years to go battle the Holy Land. What can I give these people to convince them to leave their homes? They chain their wife to a wall. They leave for 25 years. They can rape and pillage and murder anybody along the way. And if they die, we'll remember their souls forever. And in church, they have these things called, look right behind you. That has a word in English. That Yortzeit board. What do you call that in English? I don't know how to pronounce it, so you're going to tell me. Diptych. Is that how you spell it?
I know what you're talking about.
A diptych? Is that what they call? Something like that is the name of the. They're boards where you engrave the names of martyrs and you bring them out on holy days and you read their names in front of the congregation. Rabbi Yosef in Philadelphia, they're busy reading names of people who already the last relative died 200 years ago. They bring out these, that's how it is. And then later the boards, we don't want to carry boards, we stuck them to the wall, and that became part of Jewish life. I'm not mocking, only saying that if you wish to see when the Jews start praising all the martyrs, it's because we also wanted to have martyrs. Until that point in Jewish history, people who died, and even worse, you read some of those stories, they kill their own children, they kill their own wives. And all of those stories, I'm not telling you it's not a horrible story, but Jewish law allows you to kill your children. What do we call people who kill their children? Sick. We call it infanticide. We call it murder. We definitely don't make plaques for them in the Beit HaKnesset and praise their actions. And so something changed in the Jewish consciousness along the way. I'm sorry if what I'm telling you will offend you. Masada, though, according to most of the Chachamim, was not necessarily the right thing to do. Jews did it. Jews do all kinds of things. Just because they do it doesn't mean it's right. And so here he said there were many, many people in communities that had they known that Jews are allowed to raise their head and fight back, we could have saved many, many lives. He said, but what about all the Pesukim that says in the Torah of exile, and Jews are going to go to exile, and the Jews will be in exile? Says Rabbi Yaakov Toledano, we are in exile. That means that we have to go from country to country, and we don't really own our homes because one day they can throw us out of our homes. And we go from place to place and place to place. And that's part of what the Jewish people do. They once asked one of the famous Ashkenazi Chachamim, why on Pesach we say, Ma nishtana layla ze. Why sing Ma nishtana? We're all sitting around the table, we're eating food, Ma nishtana. Sukkot, we're all eating outside in the backyard, we're sleeping on the floor. Why don't we sing Ma nishtana on Sukkot? He said, because when the Jews sit around the table and they eat fancy food and they talk about how we overthrew our enemies, that doesn't happen every day. Manishtana, that's a special thing. But to be thrown out of your house, sleeping in the backyard, Jews have been doing that forever. We're always being thrown out of our houses. There's nothing to say Manishtana for. This whole story of Galut is one of exile. But we're not given to shiflut. We're not here to be stepped on, to be murdered, to be mutilated, to be destroyed, to be raped, to be pillaged. That's not Galut. Galut doesn't include that. Ask a famous question. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows Tanakh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avraham Avinu. Yeah? And what's going to happen to them? Yeah, you'll serve them and Ve'inu otam. And they will torture you. And they will torture you. That's what it says, no? The Pasuk says that? It says Rav Toledano, the being servants in Egypt, that was part of God's plan. The fact that the Egyptians will torture you, that's a prophecy that God told Abraham. The proof? The proof is that you remember our Chachamim say, how long were the Jews supposed to be slaves in Egypt for? 400 years. But they got out on good behavior. What happened? 210. Why 210? Kiminyan Radu. To be persecuted, tormented. Why did they get out? Why did they get out early? Because the level of persecution with the Egyptians persecuted them made up for the amount of time. It was quality over quantity. And here says Rav Toledano that this whole point is the Jews were only supposed to be slaves in Egypt. Not to be killed, not to be put into bricks, to be drowned in the river. That we didn't sign up for. And the fact that they did that meant that we got out early. And this answers a famous question of the Rambam. The Rambam has a famous question. You remember the Rambam's question about leaving Egypt, about Paro? Why should the Egyptians be punished if?
It's hard.
Okay, that's a good question. If?
It's hard.
Okay, if? Those are all good questions. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu said the Jews are supposed to be slaves in Egypt, why are they in trouble for following God's divine plan?
Even a murderer gets punished for murdering someone. If a person's supposed to die by the hand of murder, it doesn't mean that the murderer goes free. Hashem wanted the guy to be murdered. So why should they find fault with the murder?
Very good. But so here Rabbi Yaakov Toledano says, the answer according to him about Egypt is because they were allowed to enslave us, but to torture us, and to hurt us, and to disgrace us, and to degrade us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't give him permission for that. That doesn't work that way. By the way, a man once came to a rabbi, true story, I just can't tell you the name of the man or the rabbi. Him and his wife were having very serious problems at home, and she complained that he was being physically abusive to her. But a guy like that, just, I'm on camera, there's police outside, should break his neck, and that should be the end of the story. A kind of sick person puts his hands on his wife. So, something, if there was a death penalty for something, I'd put it over there. You don't want to be married to somebody, so don't be married, leave him alone. But to be married to them and hurt them, that's a not normal situation. I don't think that women can abuse men also. It goes the two ways. Two people are invited to this party. But this man said, listen how Jews work. Not all Jews. All people of religion think like this. Religion is always going to justify my bad behavior. He says, Rabbi, God told me that I should abuse my wife. Where does it say that in the Torah? Bereshit. Elishech teshu ka tech v'huyim. And he will rule over her. I'm supposed to be a tyrant over my wife. Is he correct or incorrect? Is that what it says in the Torah? That's what it says in the Torah. What are you telling him he's incorrect for?
That was like, as a result, that's what man's going to wind up doing. What? It's not like this is my consequence to you.
So it's not one of the 613 mitzvot. No. Rather, what is it? It's a curse. It's a curse. It's a curse to live in a world where a man will rule over his wife. It's a curse. By the way, I'm not a Mekubal. I'm telling you something important for the Mekubalim. When the Mekubalim see what happens in the world, especially in the last few hundred years, I'm trading very lightly because it's not my topic for tonight, to see that roles of men and women shift. And in some capacity in the world, women are no longer who they were or not allowed to be 100 years ago, 50 years ago. Dare I say, okay, I'm just going to stop talking now. As this changes, there is a redemption of a curse that exists in the world. It's not supposed to be that way. Our Chachamim warn us against marrying our daughters to Amei Haaretz because those men, they use her whenever they want, they beat her whenever they want. We don't want our families to have men like that inside of them. When I was by the grave of the Piasetzner Rebbe's wife in Poland, and I saw in the middle of the Holocaust what he engraved on her tombstone. My friend, my love, my study partner, the master of Chassidut and Kabbalah, writes about his wife. Then you see, what does it mean to be married to a Talmid Chacham? Not Talmid Chacham and he learns the Gemara all day. The refinement of character. It's a curse that you have a world which is so imbalanced. Don't take the curses of the Torah and turn them into mitzvot. All of the curses you find in the Torah, what exile is going to look like, and what's going to happen to us if we're in exile, the Nevi'im warn us it's going to happen to you with your carcasses on the side of the road. All of the terrible things that are written there are not dreams that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to see happen. Those are threats. Like when you tell your kid, if you don't clean the room, You don't want to do any of that. That's why usually you don't finish the sentence. In any good warm culture, anyone from Latin American background here?
Me.
You know what is a chancla?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? My grandmother had her own version of a chancla. She had a stick on top of the refrigerator. My grandmother had a stick on... My grandmother would just go like that. I never even saw her hit anybody with a stick. She would just go like that and you would run for the hills. Everyone knows in a certain culture that when your mother reaches for her slipper, you better run fast. Your life will be... But CPS will never know what to do with this information. There are different cultures in the world. They don't all say, hey, Johnny, that's 3. It doesn't always work like that.
The belts.
What happened? That's always the mothers. Yeah? So what happens? Why was I telling you to start by chanclas? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling you, I'm warning you. Mess with me, here's what's going to happen to you. He doesn't want us to live a life like that. He's not dreaming of that. He's definitely not telling the nations of the world what they should do to us. And says Rabbi Yaakov Toledano, the fact that there are religious leaders in the world that are teaching people that Jews are supposed to suffer, that have turned the massacre and the destruction and the humiliation of Jewish people into some kind of holiness, into some kind of thing that we suffer for God, he said is one of the sickest developments that has taken place in our exile. And he mentions that this thing seems to have started in some places, especially he mentions in Europe, but that it spread. It spread to all the Sephardic countries as well. We can trace how it spread. But it already became a mentality almost everywhere. He mentions, if you look on the second page of the PDF, or really the third page, that most famously was Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, who's in exile, he sees an Egyptian man hitting a Jewish man. What does he do? He doesn't say Tehillim for him. He doesn't, go to the kotel or something. What does he do? He kills the guy. What do you mean you're going to hit a Jew? He's your slave. He's not there for you to hit him. That's not how this works. These stories happen. We mentioned the Bar Kokhba revolt. The fact that there was such rabbinic backing, I'm not telling you that it was right or wrong. I'm telling you the fact that Jews didn't say, oh, it's Galut now. Now we have to sit down and be good little puppies. Nobody thought that. There was serious debate whether it was the right thing, was the right time, was the right place. But the fact was that everyone understood, hey, we're going to have to get ourselves out of the situation somehow. Nobody prayed over there. There was a kotel, no? Nobody was praying in the kotel. They were getting ready for war. That's how Jewish people get themselves out of Galut. 1948 is how we got out of Galut also. We also got ready for war. That's the way it happened. I know that people think there's 2 ways the redemption can happen. The redemption started happening 76 years ago, Kimat, and it happened only one way. And for you to think that somehow in the middle of the program it's going to change and then things are going to fall out of the sky, that means that you're in denial of everything happened in the last 76 years. The redemption happens when the Jewish people redeem themselves. Who's assistants? Assistants of the creator of the universe. And where do we learn that from? Most importantly, from the story of Purim. From the story of Purim. Look with me here. On page Kuf Pei Bet. I might have skipped a page, 1 second. Yeah, let's look here. On page Kuf Pei Aleph, 1 page before. He says the following. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 lines down. 6 lines down. 7 lines down after Moshe Rabbeinu. V'chen begalut Yisrael befaras. And in the Jewish exile of Persia. Listen to the real story of Purim. What lesson are you supposed to walk away from Purim with? This one. Keshera'u Esther u'Mordechai. When Esther and Mordechai saw Gezerat Haman, the decree of Haman, leharog, lehashmid, u'le'abed, et kol ha'Yehudim, mina'ar v'ad zaken, ta'afu shani, v'nashim, u'shladam lavos. They're going to take the men, the women, the children, all of their stuff they're going to steal. Are you watching our soldiers coming back from Gaza with people Seder plates? You've seen those pictures? They're finding Israeli cars miles into territory. All of that was stolen also on October 7th. Not just people, not just murders, not just rapes, not just babies being burned in ovens, not just. Also the stuff. This was straight out of Haman's playbook. Haman, when they saw this, lo hishtadlu levatel et gzerat dafka. They didn't just go and pray that God should get rid of the decree, or that they went to go talk to Achashverosh, or they went to go file paperwork with the government, or they went to the I don't want to mention names of non-profit organizations that pretend that they help you with anti-Semitism. Ela gam hipilu pachadam al hatzorerim. They decided to scare the living daylights out of their enemies. What did it say? V'rabim me'amei haaretz mityahadim. All of a sudden, in the middle of this genocide against the Jews, many Persians become Jewish. Why convert to Judaism when we're about to get killed? Why? We're more scared of the Jews than we are of Haman. Because the Jews are crazy. The Jews know how to fight. The Jews know how to go to war, and look at them, they're getting ready. That's what it says in the Megillah. Lashiv makah al makehem v'yasu b'sonehem kirtzonam. That they went to war. Mordechai and Esther were teaching the Jewish people a very valuable lesson. It's not just in the land of Israel that the Jewish people stand up for their lives. It's not just in the land of Israel that we have the right to protect our castle. It's everywhere in the world. It's in exile. It's under non-Jewish occupation. In the land and outside of the land. What I'm telling you now is very important, and I'm making a disclaimer. I'm not encouraging anyone to break any laws in any of the places where they live. But there's a philosophy in the Jewish community. Rabbanit, it's okay if I share? I might lose some people in the Beit Midrash. In 2018, there was a shooting in the San Diego synagogue. You might remember, Chabad of Poway. A man came to the synagogue and shot at the community. That synagogue has had its own tragedies since, not connected to that shooting. But that night, I sat with my wife and said, I've waited too long. I've been living in America since 2013. And if somebody were to walk into my synagogue, or to walk into my house, I don't do Krav Maga. I'm not the guy who knows how to do this. What do? I have to get a firearm. I'm not a NRA, Guns and Moses, don't tread on. It's not me. I don't come from any political background in this. I have no amendment rights that I'm standing up for. I'm thinking, I'm a Jewish person sitting in Galut. When I called my friend Rabbi Josh Gerstein, who's a rabbi in the Israeli army, October 10th, I said, Rav Josh, how are you guys doing over there in Israel? I said, me, we're fine. We've got soldiers. How are you guys doing in San Diego? So we have Israeli soldiers, Magen David, we got technology, you guys have nothing. You're sitting there, sitting ducks. And so I went, and I applied for a permit, and I went for training, and because I live in the glorious state of California, it took me over 1.5 years to get all of that. Someone in my community just applied for a permit December 31st, and they gave them an appointment for June of 2025. It's not so simple. But I went, I did all my courses, and I tested by the sheriff, and I'm not embarrassed to tell you, no, you don't speak about this on camera. I carry a firearm. I sleep with a firearm. Only, I don't swim with a firearm. I don't swim so much in general. And I know that some people might find that scary. Remember that time when I was hit on the street in San Diego? I was armed then. But just because a 14-year-old kid on a bike punches you in the head doesn't mean you could go all, 007 on it. I don't know. It kind of you still live in a country that has laws. But people should know that Jewish people aren't sitting ducks. The Jewish community knows how to defend itself, not just because we have good lawyers in Washington, D.C., and we got all these political lobbying organizations, because you are out of your mind if you think you're going to walk into a Bet Knesset and walk out of there alive by trying to hurt Jews. What I'm asking for right now is not a political agenda. This is a religious agenda. Our people, we might deserve to be sitting in exile, and I know maybe not all of you sitting here think you're in exile, but that's even the greater exile. But to be in exile is one thing. To be vulnerable in exile, that's not okay. That's not okay. It's not acceptable. Jewish people who get hurt are because we still haven't taught the world you don't want to mess with us. We have one of the most capable military forces in the world. And people still think they can mess with us. It takes a lot. Remember that synagogue massacre in Har Nof? My community started, we got our location a few weeks after that story. It's why my Bet Knesset has no sign outside. I'll never even know where to find it. But that story of a man coming into the synagogue and killing Jews, and nobody could do anything about it. Until one brave tzaddik, a Druze traffic cop, he wasn't even he was giving tickets on the road, if I remember correctly. He heard, he ran inside, he lost his life, but he saved the rest of the community. That's what it has to take. Gotta wait for the traffic cop. It's time for Am Yisrael to recognize that Galut, the price you pay for Galut is that we're in exile. But more than that, Jewish blood isn't cheap. Jewish blood isn't free. We are not weaklings. We are children of warriors. We are not pacifists. We believe in peace. We love peace. But as Shlomo HaMelech taught us, there's a time for peace. There's a time for war. And like I told you last time, that in Israel we have nothing to apologize for. We are doing the work of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's our job. There. Our job here is to make sure that every single one of you, and I'm talking to every single one of you, in a way that is modest, in a way that is humble, in a way that is not, you're not showing off. That's not the purpose of what I'm telling you now. But every one of you is responsible for protecting your own life. If that means to go study self-defense classes, that means to go take training in a firearms course, if that means to go become proficient in any means of protecting yourself and your family, history has taught us too many times that even in the greatest of countries where Jewish people live, sometimes the tide changes. And it changes much faster than we like to believe. The horror music doesn't start playing in the background. I was sitting in the car with my kids last week. We put on the soundtrack of Jaws. You know Jaws? Mm-hmm. I never watched the movie. I'm afraid of sharks. But there's that theme song. And I told my kids, to hear that song, it's never going to happen to you in real life. Never are you going to be walking down a dark street in Brooklyn and all of a sudden before some guy says, "Hey Jew," and never is there going to be background music on the guy's cell phone before he punches you. If you don't know how to take care of yourself, who will? In the words of a friend in the San Diego Police Department, said, "Rabbi, When seconds matter, we are only minutes away. It's a very important thing what I'm telling you tonight. And therefore, Rabbi Toledano has just one more thing to tell us. And he says the following. Look on page Kuf Pei Bet. V'chova, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down, last word on the line. V'chova al kol gedolei Yisrael u'manhigav. It is the responsibility of all the rabbis of the Jewish people and their leaders. Likboa limudim ka'ele bevatei haTalmud Torah v'hayishivot. That these kind of classes must be mandatory in all Jewish schools and yeshivot. Shaar kvu'a liyom. A regular hour every day, a regular time. Leman yu haTalmidim v'abachurim muchanim lekrav al kol tzara shelo tavo. So the Jewish people can be ready for any war that will happen. And he goes on to praise the young generation of Israelis that are all proficient in arms, that all know how to go to war. By the way, there's a price you pay for that. I'm going to tell you now. Nobody yet has stopped to talk about how you deal with a country that's been operating for 75 years where the majority of people are suffering on some level from PTSD. All out of what you blame on Israeli attitude or Israeli chutzpah or Israeli has to do with the fact that it's really hard to be living all the time with your life on the line, with a friend who died, a brother who died, a sister who died. My family has enough people who died inside of it that I could tell alone, even those of us who didn't live in Israel, suffer from those feelings. And to deal with a national trauma like that, look at how American Jews are still dealing with the Holocaust when it's grandparents' generation. There's a price that you pay for being ready for war. But death is so much worse. And it's our job to speak about this because this is the story of Purim. They always tell you there's no name of God in the Megillah. And they're right. There is no name of God in the Megillah. Because in Galut, in exile, you don't sit around praying for miracles. You have to make sure, this may sound like the most godless thing you ever heard from me. The Jewish people know, politics aside, following the law, in every place you must follow the law. But people should know that Am Yisrael Chai is alive, but not only are we alive, we're not going to let anyone change that sentence in any direction. We don't want to be in anybody's Holocaust museum. We don't want to be in anybody's memorial plaques. We don't want to be doing more Yom HaZikarons and more Yom HaShoahs and more Tisha B'Av. We don't want to do that anymore. It's time for us to say, Am Yisrael, we're not losers. Am Yisrael, we are proud people. Today you live in a very special generation. You live in one of the first generations of Jews who has a homeland. You have your own army. You might not like him. You have a prime minister. You have a president. You have a Knesset. You have a Supreme Court that you either hate or you love. It doesn't matter, but you have one. These are things that Jews 100 years ago, 100 years ago, dare I say 90 years ago, 80 years ago, if a Jew sitting in Auschwitz or Birkenau or Maidan could know that at any moment now, Israeli special forces could drop out of the sky and save my life. If you could just whisper that into some Jew's ear, if you could say such a thing, you can't even imagine, they wouldn't even believe you. There's such a reality in the world. There are Jewish people that know how to protect themselves. They know how to be there for each other. There was a famous rabbi in the raid on Entebbe. Remember the raid on Entebbe? If you were there, don't tell me, but some of us watched the movie. The raid on Entebbe was probably one of the greatest Kiddush Hashems that happened in Israeli history outside of the borders of Israel. You can't take Jews and expect to get away with it. There was one famous rabbi, again here in New York, a different rabbi than the one before. He said, it can't be. It can't be that God would help such secular Israelis. Those were his words. So must be it was the Satan. It was the Satan who helped them because Jews don't fight. There's a theology that Jews die. In my opinion, the only Satan is the one who thinks that way. We believe only in God. I don't know that there's another Satan out there who has superpowers. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us in the Torah, v'chai bahem. You have an obligation to live through your mitzvot. And so what did I come to tell you tonight? One is, there's a mitzvah to live in Israel. There's a mitzvah. It's so much easier to not have to worry about what happens in the next anti-Semitic incident on an American college campus when you don't have to deal with an American college campus. It's just an incredible thing to be home. And those of you that can go home, it's time for us to go home. And those of you that want to talk to me about how we all go home together, my dream is that enough of us together go home so we're not all doing this alone. But I can dream and we could talk about it one day. But those of us that are not home yet, to realize that you have a religious obligation, a responsibility to yourself, to your families, to your communities. The Jewish people, and I say this with no desire to be extremist, fanatic, or warmongering, that people should know you can't get away with hurting Jewish people anymore. That is so yesterday. That is, we say never again and again and again and again, over and over. But in Chutz La'aretz, Queen Esther and Mordechai Tzaddik, they taught us that Jewish people in exile also have a right to live. Yeah, we may be in exile. Maybe you have to take some of your paycheck and pay to the New York State and the federal government. That's part of Galut, Chevra. But more than that, you're not deserving of any more suffering for being Jewish than that. And you live in a special country. A country where there are no laws that because you're Jewish you have to pay more tax or you suffer more or you get less freedoms or rights. To the contrary. And so the only galut we must free ourselves from is the galut of our mind. And I ask, in this holiday of Purim, you're sitting around a Purim table. Ask about the story of Purim. Where was HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What lesson were the Chachamim telling us by omitting the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Why did Mordechai and Esther not just pray? Because that's what they tell us. Everybody prays and then we win the war. No, that's what I heard. You don't have to go to war because the people who die in war must be idiots because they should know. All you have to do is pray. What did they say? I saw a rabbi put out a proclamation. For every rocket we have Tehillim, and every RPG we got a Gemara, and every... Try it one day, Chevra. Say, here's an RPG. You hold your Gemara. See what happens. I have a lot of volunteers. On both sides, I have volunteers. It's a crazy thing. It's time for Am Yisrael to become normal again. And to be normal means to teach the world. We are too good of a people, too special of a people, to allow ourselves to be treated over and over and over again like the most undeserving people on earth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us. And our v'chilaltem et shemi bagoyim, we sometimes desecrate God's name by not standing up for ourselves. We are allowed to have self-esteem and not become arrogant, and not become evil, and not to become... We are simply people like all other people on earth. And all people on earth have the right to live. All of us have a right to defend our castle. Whether that castle be the land of Israel, the castle be my synagogue in the United States, which was considered Mikdash Me'at, a miniature land of Israel outside of Israel, or my Jewish home, which is my personal land of Israel. That's my castle. Every one of us has that right. That right was given to us by the Torah. You live in a country that also gives you, to some degree, that right. And I ask you, utilize that right so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be proud of us and he can finish our redemption, which he began in 1948. Because Hashem, by this time already next year, we'll be together in Yerushalayim. V'aviotim al har kodeshi v'simachtim bevet tefilati. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring us back to his holy mountain. Just on Wednesday morning, I was standing on Har HaBayit and I was praying for every single one of you. I'm usually a rational person. Usually. The only place in the world I'm irrational is on Temple Mount. I have been to the Kotel. I was on the Kotel on Wednesday morning too. And I've stood in front of that wall many times in my life saying, how come everybody else is crying? I don't feel anything here. Many times. I'm embarrassed to tell you that. And I'll pray, and if they send me notes from San Diego, I'll even stick them into the wall. And I'll ignore the opinions of the rabbis who say you can't put your fingers in the wall because that's a Temple Mount and Jews can't go into the Temple Mount. There's an opinion like that. And the first time, in August of 2022, the month of Av, I went to a mikveh, my wife, my children, and I went up to Har HaBayit. And my wife hates those pictures. It's the background of my phone. She hates those pictures because her eyes are red and puffy. And I can't tell you why every time I'm there, I feel like I'm in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because usually I'm a rational person. And usually I wonder, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu even listening to me? And when I stand there, when I wash the hands of a Kohen in an Israeli army uniform, and I washed his hands as a Levi, and he said Birkat Kohanim to me, in front of a minyan of people, because that happens today, twice a day, 7 o'clock in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There are minyanim in Har HaBayit. And the Kohen blesses me, and I think to myself, For the first time in 2,000 years, I, a Levi, washed the hands of a Kohen on Har HaBayit. You are not living in a regular generation, Chevra. But the day before I went up, there were Hamas flags on Har HaBayit. There were Hamas flags. I have pictures if you don't believe me. If I were to bring an Israeli flag to Har HaBayit, I would get arrested. It's still a federal offense to wave an Israeli flag in the capital of the state of Israel. And there's work to do, also in Israel. But for here, please, I want to make sure that when I leave, I know that everybody here is safe. Everybody here is protected. If you're concerned, if you're not sure, if you're worried about anything I said, that's what I'm sticking around for. But thank you so much for learning Torah with me tonight. This is also Torah. Everything that we study today, in my opinion, is the true purpose of the story of Purim. And Bezrat Hashem, we should utilize that power of Purim to protect Am Yisrael. HaKadosh should bless all of our soldiers who are right now in Gaza. Last night when I was in DC, a few families there got notices their children crossed over the border today in the morning. We bless them. They should go in peace, come back in peace. B'reim u'shlemim l'chek mishpachtam. They should come back not just physically okay, but also emotionally okay to the waiting arms of their families, which is all of us, all of Am Yisrael. Adonai oz v'amo yitehem. Adonai varech et amo b'shalom.